On August 4th, 1914, the German army invaded Belgium. The von Schlieffen plan was set in motion. The Belgian army caused the first blows of the German war machine. But who were these Belgian soldiers? Who these men were and what they wore, where they fought, that's what you will learn in this video. In this formations episode, we're gonna talk about the Belgian army of the First World War, 1914. Hey, good to have you back on the channel. And oh, by the way, if you're new, I'm Stefan, I'm a history teacher. I'm not from Belgium. Don't worry, I'm from the Netherlands. It's close. And I like to hustle history for you. And if you like that as well, then consider subscribing and do hit the notification bell. The Kingdom of Belgium was barely 85 years old when the Great War started. Now, initially Belgium was part of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands that was established after the Napoleonic Wars, but after the Belgian Revolution, which took place in 1830, Belgium became an independent kingdom. Belgium was a small nation and therefore relied on neutrality, and this neutrality was guaranteed by the Treaty of London 1839, signed by the British but also other European nations. And this initially seemed a success because Belgium escaped war violence during the Franco-Prussian War 1870-71. But past results do not guarantee successes in the future. So with the European tensions rising, the Belgian government aimed for expanding the army to 340,000 men. But these goals came too little, too late. At the eve of the Great War, the Belgian army consisted of 120,500 men, of which 3,500 were gendarmes, and had a shortfall of 2,300 officers. And the Belgians, they relied on a static defense with fortifications around the cities of Antwerp, Liège and Namur. These fortresses were built in the 19th century and were known as the National Redoubt. As for the army itself, inspecting officers wrote the following about their army. When in town, the soldiers moved around in a dirty and slovenly manner. On seeing an officer approaching, they would move in such a way as not to have to salute him. One could see them walking with chin on chest, feet gliding over the ground. Infantrymen, always without arms or belts, wearing their great coat and awful headgear, had a wretched look. The officers were no better, and on parade their multifarious uniforms gave an impression of a flock without consistency. So let's take a look at the Belgian uniform. Well, this uniform hadn't changed much since the major changes that had occurred in 1853. The tunics were dark blue, made out of wool, and so were the trousers and was the great coat. That was the basic uniform for the Belgian infantrymen of 1914. As far as I could see, their trousers were lighter than the tunic, although pictures show different things. Looking at this photograph, you can clearly see that the person on the right has darker trousers than the person on the left. Now, possible explanation will be given later. Something really unique were the dog-drawn carts. Yep, the Belgians, they use large dogs as beasts of burden for drawing cars with light equipment. Think of machine guns. I read that this also occurred in the Netherlands, but I have no photographic material to prove that. The Belgian army had several very interesting pieces of headgear. The normal infantryman was provided with, how do you call this? A shako? Sometimes these were provided with covers. I believe that these covers were provided after the war broke out, but I'm not entirely sure, so if you know it, please leave a comment down below. Grenadiers had a field cap like you see here. The top was dark blue and below it was colored red. Carbineers had the coolest of them all. Look! A hat with one side slightly flipped up. Furthermore, these men wore black tunics. Civic Guards had similar looking headgear provided with a feather. That's right, a feather. And cavalry had these big busbies. The Belgian army, 1914, had no helmets. Now, as the war progressed, they adopted the French Adrien helmet, with a line plate in front of it. The average Belgian soldier wore low ankle boots with black leather gaiters, the same as the French had in 1914. As for weaponry, the Belgians carried the Mauser model 1889, and this weapon was, well, obviously a German model, and the reason why the Belgian military leaders had turned to Germany for their weapons was that these weapons were proven to be effective, and it would take far too much effort developing and designing your own weaponry. Therefore, they turned to the Germans. What I learned from CNR Arsenal was that this weapon was not as good as the Mauser Gewehr 98, but still was very effective. Only on long range, these weren't that accurate, but Belgian soldiers were trained for this. And officers were equipped with the Nagant M1895 revolver. Looking at equipment, most Belgian troops had a leather belt, as well as carrying strips provided with one ammo pouch, a bayonet, shovel, bread bag plus field canteen, and on top of that the men wore the knapsack with a mess tin and blanket on top of it. What you need to realize right now, and this is really important, was that as soon as the war broke out and the Belgian soldiers retreated, there was a lot of chaos, and therefore there was a lot of mixing, so to say. If you want to study how the Belgian army looked like before the First World War, let's say in 1913, then the photographs from August 1914 are not reliable because the units, the equipment, the uniforms were very mixed. And this might also explain the photograph that I showed you earlier about two Belgian soldiers, presumably from the same unit, but they had a different color of trousers. And it gets even worse because during the retreat from Antwerp, a Belgian soldier, he wrote that out of his unit, which consisted of 200 men, not two men were dressed alike. Some wore yellow or black boots, wooden clogs, or even slippers. The trousers were of every possible color, including some that were nameless in any language. There was such a profusion of different jackets or tunics that were impossible to list them all. Old model Lancer jackets, carabinier tunics, jackets turned inside out, other modified by the user or by some would-be tailor he had met along the road. So this brings me to the chaotic battles the Belgian Army of 1914 fought in. The first major battle took place near Liège. Now, Liège was surrounded by multiple fortresses, like I mentioned earlier. Now, however, the Germans managed to capture the town fairly quick. The fortresses did not surrender that easy. So therefore, the Germans brought in the big guns, and I'm talking about the big Bertha howitzers. And they pulverized these fortresses that were not able to withstand such heavy caliber guns. Most Belgian soldiers within these fortresses perished, or when they escaped, surrendered shortly after. The Battle of Haarlem took place, which is also known as the Battle of the Silver Helmets. The Silver Helmets referred to the helmets of the German cuirassiers that were mowed down by Belgian troops. Now, however, Belgians achieved a tactical victory here. It was definitely not a strategic one because they had to retreat anyhow. Next up was Namur. Namur was also surrounded by several fortresses and was attacked on August 20th. The Germans once again, they brought in the big guns and pulverized the fortresses of Namur. Therefore also Namur had fallen. The remaining Belgian forces, they withdrew to Antwerp. Antwerp was also surrounded by fortifications. On the 27th of September, the Germans started to shell these fortifications, and the fortresses were pulverized one by one and soon had to surrender. British reinforcements did arrive, but it was too little, too late, and on the 3rd, the Belgian troops as well as the government were evacuated, and thus Antwerp had fallen. From the autumn of 1914, the Belgians stood firm at the Eastern Front and would continue to do so till the whole duration of the war. It was also then when the Belgian tunics started to be modified. Dark blue had to make way for khaki. But this is a different story I might elaborate on in the future. Now, if you want to know more about the German invasion of Belgium, you can click right here. And if you want to know more about the German occupation of Belgium in the First World War, you can click right here. Check me out on Patreon, because with your donations I can make better, cooler and more awesome content for you. That was it for now. Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you later.